Good morning. Welcome to Law Power Hour. Good morning, Dan. Good morning, Amy.
Good morning.
Welcome back.
Good morning, Barry. Thank you, sir. It's a pleasure.
Dan Williams and Amy Fowler practice law together, husband and wife, have been advocates in the marijuana industry, represented clients, and I wanted them to come on today because we just passed laws, and I took a pause for a minute because I don't know if it's good or bad that we passed these laws, and I'm not going to take a position on that. We're dealing with two issues here: the legislation and the legality of marijuana versus the decriminalization of marijuana. And let's talk about the decriminalization for a few minutes, first of all. So, Amy, do you think we should give everyone who's in jail for sale, distribution, and possession of drugs a free ride now and amnesty for everyone?
It depends, Barry. And I say that every time I'm on this show with you because our new Attorney General Dana Nessel, has indicated that she has a friendly approach to allowing people who are in jail and prison for simple possession to effectively have the punishments that have been imparted to them by our court system back when it was illegal vacated. That being said, for larger players in the realm, particularly the black market, because we're going from a black market model into a gray, into a more legal zone.
You're talking about the illicit and legal market.
That's correct. So for the black market, for those people who have been in trafficking roles, we're talking kilo level transfers of the product. I don't believe, and I don't think that our new Attorney General is going to probably be amenable to forgiving those individuals for their particular activities that they've engaged in the past.
Even the traffic at the border is increased in the searches because Canada has legalized marijuana. So about every fourth or fifth car coming through gets checked out, find out who's using, who's abusing, who's transporting. So it's a very important issue, I understand. We have the under the radar, we'll call it, instead of the black market or illegal market, but those operating under the radar, coasting along, making money at the expense of society. Now, Dan, I have a very important question to ask you today. So I'm 17 years old. If I'm driving and I have alcohol in the car, I'm going to get picked up for being a minor in possession, correct?
Correct.
How are you going to handle a 17-year-old who's got a joint with him?
Same way.
Is there a law written that minors in possession of marijuana are going to be treated the same?
So under, under Proposal 1, if you're under the age of 21, you are not allowed to possess recreational marijuana for any reason. Now, the one caveat is there is, under some circumstances, the ability for a minor with a script and parental authorization to possess a medical marijuana card. And so if they were possessing it under their medical marijuana card, that would be legal. But as a general rule, no. 17-year-olds are not going to be able to drive around, willy-nilly and without repercussion if they get caught having marijuana in the vehicle.
Now, if you're just waking up out there this morning, I want you to chime in and call in because this is a real important program today about how marijuana is going to impact you, your family, and the community.
And Barry, I want to make 2 points too. One, we have to be very clear when we talk about recreational marijuana in Michigan, and for example, we talked about border crossings. In Canada, they have legalized marijuana nationally. So their federal government and all of the territorial governments have said, okay, we're going to permit this. Here in America, 10 states now have allowed recreational marijuana use. The federal government says it's still illegal.
Federal government won't let you put money in a federal deposited insured bank because it's illegal. So we have to set up separate banking systems.
Correct, and that's even an even more complicated issue. But I want to warn viewers as well. If you're 21 in Michigan and you're lawfully possessing recreational marijuana after December 6th, because it's 10 days after the vote gets certified, and you try to travel to Canada and you have marijuana in your car, the United States Border Patrol finds that, you will be arrested under federal law, and they can go after you for that. So I want everyone to be careful. On the banking side, the banking system is very complicated, and there are a number of lawyers who are very good at dealing with banking law. It's a whole area. What I can say is the federal government passes regulations on how and when banks can accept money. And it's not so much that banks are prohibited from accepting money from the marijuana industry. There's no rule that says they can't. However, in order for them to do it, it is so much paperwork and requires so much effort on their part that those are very high-risk accounts. They don't want to deal with it. It's too costly. And if they make a mistake and they can't account for every single penny being brought in, being legitimately made in the industry and accounted for tax purposes, then they do subject themselves to potential liability, either through the SEC or through the federal government. And so that's why the banking situation is very complicated. If, however, you had a commercial business in the marijuana industry where you could literally account, and you have to in that space now, for every dollar that comes in the door, and you could prove to a bank that every single dollar was accounted for, you might be able, even today, to be able to open an account.
Okay, let's just stop for a minute here. You mentioned the word commercial,
Yes.
and it has a special place here because of Eli Lilly.
Yes.
Okay, Eli Lilly is one of the largest drug manufacturers in the world.
Mhm.
And they've almost cornered the market, haven't they, on the seed industry? Monsanto used to be big in the seed industry,
Mhm.
but now Eli Lilly's right up in it when it comes to seeds for marijuana, correct?
They have a corner on a certain portion of the market. So the federal government does permit research to be done under very strict regulations by large companies who get permission from the government to do it. In the state of Michigan, however, Eli Lilly does not have a commercial license to grow marijuana or sell marijuana or do any of those things. And so within the boundaries, at least of the state of Michigan, they can't do that. And they can't sell across state lines from another state where they are permitted to do it because the federal government doesn't allow that. We don't have interstate commerce protections for the marijuana industry because it's still illegal under federal law.
Now, Amy, I'm not a
Yes.
scholar in this area, but I did do a little bit of reading. And I understand that there are different levels of responsibility in the industry. For example, there are people who are called growers, and I use
Yes.
the word growers, meaning like marijuana farms,
Correct.
and there are people who are called transporters,
Yes.
and then there are retailers,
Correct.
and then there are testers.
Yes.
So we're opening up a lot of new jobs.
Absolutely.
So how does this go, Amy? Explain to me a little bit how this works. And I want our audience to understand this because I want to talk to you about adulterated marijuana for a minute when we get done.
Okay, wonderful. So there are 5 licenses under the medical umbrella of medical marijuana that Michigan has effectively adopted. There are the secure transporters, who are the licensees who are going to be transporting the medical product from one point to another point. There, and we'll get into that after I explain the other 4 types of licenses. There are growers, which most people are interested in getting into, and there's a Class A, for 500 plants, a Class B for 1,000 plants, and a Class C, which is the largest, which allows a facility to hold 1,500 marijuana plants. There are dispensaries. They were formerly known as dispensaries. We now, in the industry, refer to them as provisioning centers, where you can buy marijuana and marijuana-infused products for your medical purpose if you are a card holder.
Now, that leads me to the next question.
Yes.
If I'm on Medicare or Medicaid, can I use my Medicare or Medicaid to pay for my marijuana?
No. Typically, it is a cash and carry proposition when you walk into a provisioning center. So you're not going to be able to use, swipe your Medicare or your supplemental or your bridge card in order to get those products.
Okay. Now, the people who run these provisional facilities,
Yes, sir.
are they going to be the same group that's going to be involved in the recreational facilities?
Yes. In fact, the model that the state has indicated it intends to set up is at the provisioning centers. There is going to be a strict line drawn within the facility where the license attaches. And there is going to be a wall or some sort of division between the medicinal side and the recreational side.
Okay.
And Barry, that is because the THC in recreational is going to be limited to 6%, whereas medical is 20% and up. So the product that you're going to be buying is substantially different as far as its psychoactive effects, as far as the forms that it's going to come in. And so they want to have a line drawn for the recreational, both because it's a different product and because there's different taxation involved. With recreational, we believe that it's going to be taxed at 19%.
Okay, now, keeping that in mind,
Yes.
and we talk about the medical marijuana side with higher THC,
Yes.
are there warnings on the medical side? You know, if I go to the drugstore and I get my monthly maintenance medication, there's still a warning on it that says, do not take this medicine with alcohol.
Right.
On the medical marijuana side, is there a warning that says, do not take this medicine with alcohol?
There are not specific indicated warnings. There are warnings, Barry. The state licensing and regulatory agency has been proactive, if you will, in getting folks to label the products. So in the last several months, they've promulgated a lot of rules about putting the marijuana leaf on the front of the packaging and indicating that it does in fact contain THC and that there are certain psychoactive effects. And they have also promulgated rules about the edibles. Edibles have been particularly debated in this arena because we don't want children grabbing those gummies or grabbing those candies that look like little nerds or grabbing that brownie and saying, oh, this is my snack.
That's on the medical marijuana side
Correct.
right now.
Correct.
Okay, now when we get to the recreational side, are we going to have jelly beans? Are we going to have cookies? Are we going to have wafers? What are we going to have over there? Are we just going to sell marijuana?
Well, my guess is, state governments don't like to duplicate work. So what we've all in the industry, at least on the legal side, sort of figured out is the state's probably going to take what they did for the medical side, because the rules are very complex. They're probably going to take those and make them applicable as best they can for the recreational side. And I imagine it will have some additional stricter regulations. The big thing for retailers and provisioning centers under the current medical rules, you have to have really nondescript packaging. Nothing that's going to be attractive to children, nothing that's going to resemble a commercially available product. That's the terms they use. It has to have the contains THC warning symbol, and it has to have indicators, as Amy said, that it can have psychoactive effect. I imagine those rules will continue to apply for recreational. The other important thing to remember is it's going to take the state, they have 12 months from December 6th to even put out an application and to set, there'll probably be emergency rules for recreational licensing.
Okay, can the people who have medical marijuana provisional centers also apply for recreational licenses?
For 2 years after the application comes out, they will be the only ones who can apply. And that's one of the big things that groups who were opposed to having recreational marijuana on the ballot kept saying there's going to be, marijuana stores in every corner and in every gas station. That's just simply not true.
Well, no, that's not true for another reason, though, because each community or each municipality can either opt in or opt out.
So that's another issue.
You agree with me on that?
I do and I don't.
Okay,
so
tell me where you don't.
For medical, the way the law is written, communities can opt in or opt out by vote, or they can do nothing. Doing nothing under medical is essentially the equivalent of opting out. Under Proposal 1, communities can opt in by doing nothing, because the law says you're basically in unless you say you're out. The danger that I think people will have from a municipal standpoint, if you do nothing, the applications start coming out and people start buying buildings in your city that would be commercially or industrially zoned and apply to the state before you opt out, there are potential lawsuits that could accompany those decisions. So there are a number of folks who are telling cities, if you don't want to be involved with recreational, you should opt out sooner rather than later.
Can you have a freestanding recreational facility in the future? You said it's going to take some time to implement the law, so we figure it's going to be the end of 2019 before the law is in place. So here it is, New Year's Eve, 2020. We've got a shop in the neighborhood. We'll call it Dan's shop,
Okay.
just for the purposes of conversation.
Sure.
So I go over to Dan's shop and I'm going to have a party, and they're going to permit edibles. So I bring back all these neat treats for everybody, but I don't tell anybody about the neat treats. Are we going to have regulations in place for the guy who decides to have this beautiful party and celebrate the new year with all the edibles?
So there's two answers to the question, because I see it as a two-part question. One, yes, I do think you will see standalone recreational marijuana stores in cities that are opted in, but for at least the next 3 years, those will only be run by people who have had medical marijuana facilities licenses. If Dan's shop sells to John Smith more than 2.5 ounces of medical marijuana or regular recreational marijuana, because that's the daily cap, they're both in violation of the law because he's not allowed to possess more than 2.5 ounces. Now, that is the highest permitted ounce purchase in the country, and it's a substantial amount of marijuana. But if Dan's shop sells to John Smith an amount that is legal under state law, after John Smith walks out, it's on John Smith what he does or doesn't do. So if you're thinking, are there going to be dram shop equivalent actions against marijuana retailers, I would say people who are violating the law and selling folks more than what they're supposed to on a daily limit, the answer would probably be yes.
Is there going to be a daily limit for recreational?
Yes.
Okay, well, that's
yes.
wonderful.
Yes.
Now I've got a wonderful question for you.
Okay.
Years ago, it was illegal for a gas station to sell liquor.
Mhm.
And now we've got a lot of gas stations that sell everything, from cigarettes to liquor to pablum for babies, they
Mhm.
take bridge cards, they take all kinds of things there. Okay?
Yes.
So I have a convenience store and a gas station, and I get a license to distribute recreational marijuana. Don't you see that as a problem? If somebody comes in and get the the recreational marijuana, and then they leave, they light up, and get in their car. Don't you see that as a problem?
Barry, it absolutely is, and the laws about operating a vehicle while under the influence are still going to be applicable. It depends on the individual, and so much in the law is a "it depends" answer, as you know. Different people metabolize THC in different ways. If you are a daily user, it is going to have less of an effect on your ability to operate a car, operate machinery, go about your daily life than if you decide on New Year's Eve that you're going to stop at 7-Eleven, you're going to get your 8 cases of beer to take to John Smith's party.
And if
And
John
you're-
Smith's out there, we're not picking on you.
That's right, absolutely. And you pick up your pack of marijuana-related cigarettes or whatever form it is, limited to 2.5 ounces, and you get in the car and you start smoking, and you have smoked marijuana in the past once, twice, maybe once a quarter. And suddenly you've got the marijuana on board. You're going to have the alcohol on board from the party. All of the rest of your friends bring their 7-Eleven packet of rec marijuana. There's some leftovers. So by the end of the night, after you have consumed your alcohol, consumed more and more and more of the product, yes, that is absolutely a problem. It calls on people to have personal responsibility for their affairs.
Okay, well-
And there's a certain assumption of the risk. If you engage in the activity, you're assuming the risk that there are going to be consequences for said same.
We already have to assume that people don't have personal responsibility for their affairs.
That we do.
That's why people get picked up for drunk driving.
Correct.
That's why people get picked up for all kinds of violations of the law. Well, let's get to responsibility. You've got children.
Yes.
I have children. You decide to become a rec user. Does that set a good example for your children?
That's up to each household to decide. I think just as we explain to children that you have to consume alcohol responsibly, that smoking normal cigarettes is a health concern for the Surgeon General, and that there are reasons why cigarette commercials don't appear in television ads anymore for children. You have to have those levels of conversations with the young ones in your life, whether you're an auntie, a grandmother, a parent, or a school counselor. There has to be an open dialogue. I believe the more information that you give children, age-appropriate children, the better decisions they're going to be able to make down the road.
Okay, let me share this little story with both of you. I represented a young man who's been picked up 3 times because he's had roach clips with butts in the car.
Mm-hmm.
He's had his box over there with his merchandise sitting next to him in the console. So I said to him, "You have a medical marijuana card?" "Oh, yeah, I've got a card." I said, "Well, why did you get a card? You're 21 years old. Why did you get a card?" "Well, my dad got a card." I said, "Your dad needs a card because he has bad arthritis. He uses a walker." Legitimate problems, and it helps ease the pain without using some of the super narcotics that are around. So I said, "Why'd you?" "Well," he said, "because I want to smoke with my dad. My son wants to smoke a cigar with me." There's not much difference, except one is marijuana and the other is a cigar. Neither one of them are very good for you, but it's a matter of choice.
Mhm.
The point I'm making is we teach by example. And if we're allowing these things to go on, isn't it creating an issue where there's some recklessness?
Potentially. But the converse of that is you are, if age appropriate, you have children, grandchildren at home who are 21 and older, and you will become a legal rec user in the state of Michigan, or you have your medical marijuana card currently, they also have one of the conditions that qualifies for a patient card. Use that as a teaching tool to use responsibly. But again, it's age dependent, and it's up to each family to find their conscious belief system about what they think is appropriate and not to lead and guide. And there's also an opportunity there if, like in the father-son example that you gave us, the father has arthritis, assuming degenerative, if he has a medical marijuana card, son who has unfortunately been brushing with the law at least 3 times and also is a card holder, maybe father and son, and father taking the lead on this, has an open and frank conversation about what it can be used for, what it is used for, how it should effectively be used and not abused. Because from the example that you gave us, where this son has had 3 brushes with the law, obviously he's been transporting, he's been having it in his glove box, he's been smoking it more than just the 3 times that he was pulled over and confronted by law enforcement. We see this. It's not, you don't just get busted on your first time. People become more lax, as we all know.
Just
The
like
more
drunk
com-
drivers.
Absolutely, absolutely. And thank God we have Uber and Lyft and all of those other carriers, if you will, for lack of a better word, who can circumvent that very destructive behavior. And people who ingest marijuana can also call Uber and Lyft and use their app to get those individuals to come pick them up so that they too don't have the problems with operating under the influence.
Let's take a break for a minute. We'll be back.
Are you in legal trouble? Are you in need of legal advice? Or just have general legal questions? Call 1-800-529-8721. That's 1-800-LAW-USA1. And watch Law Power Hour and get your questions answered by experienced attorneys who are experts in their field. That's Law Power Hour, hosted by Barry Keller, attorney at law. Saturdays at 10 a.m. here on WHPR Detroit Live.
I can cultivate my marijuana at home with 12 plants, right?
That's
Correct.
correct.
I don't need a license to go out and buy the 12 plants.
Correct.
I can't go to Bourdain's and buy them.
That
but
is
I,
correct.
I can go.
That's
Not
going to
yet.
be an
Not yet.
interesting day.
Not yet.
Not
That's
yet.
going to be an interesting day when you can go into Bourdain's or English Gardens and purchase those.
Right. And I like both of those places, by the way. And I shop in
As
both of those places.
As do we.
But the point I'm making is, where am I going to get my 12 plants?
Well, you are allowed to possess them at your home. So, you're talking about on the recreational side.
On the recreational side.
Find somebody who's willing to sell it to you, and as long as you're doing it lawfully, and you don't have more than 12 plants, and you keep them in an enclosed, locked facility, what does that mean? Well, it has to be an area that is separated by a door or some sort of mechanism that can keep people out and be locked. You're most likely going to be okay. Now, again, you can only have 10 ounces of recreational marijuana in your home, and only 2.5 ounces on your person at any given time. And the other caution that people really need to pay attention to is the Michigan Court of Appeals this past year determined that marijuana that was still considered to be quote-unquote wet marijuana was not usable. And so if you're caught with quote-unquote wet marijuana that is not usable, that they still found to be a violation of state law, and you could be prosecuted. So there are some risks until that gets settled. I ultimately think the Michigan Supreme Court is going to say, look, we're not making these distinctions. It's going to be, if you're allowed to possess 12 plants, and you're allowed to possess 12 plants, whether they're wet and hanging or they're dried and usable or whatever. But that has to be settled out.
Okay, but the issue of the 12 plants, what's the yield from 12 plants? See, I'm such a novice in this area. What's the yield from 12 plants?
Well, we've never personally grown them, so it's hard to say. I
Well,
have
you know
clients,
people who grow
Right.
them.
We do, but the problem is the people, any grower who's growing them in their basement that you ask is going to tell you they're the best grower in the world. And
Correct.
we've had people what? From a pound a plant to 8 pounds a plant?
Correct. And the harvest can be accelerated. The average is 12 weeks, give or take. We have clients who harvest every 6 to 8 weeks,
Oh.
depending on the chemicals, the conditions that they're growing in, the water system. It becomes very complicated and very scientific.
But those are caregivers, and they're selling to other people, aren't they?
Yeah, some of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some of them are,
Is that legal to sell to other people?
if you're a caregiver,
Yeah.
you're allowed to sell to any of your 5 registered patients or to another caregiver.
Well, don't you see under the radar activities going on if you're growing 12 plants and your yield can be as much as a pound?
I can say that.
Good morning.
Good morning. Attorney Keller, you just hit a nail on the head there. Well, regarding one plant, if it yields a pound, but the state regulation says I only can have maximum 10 ounces in a locked safe area in my house, aren't I in violation of the law?
Well, that was the issue we were talking about. Yes, you would be in violation of the law by having it there because, as Dan pointed out, there was no distinction made between wet and dry marijuana. But my bigger concern is if you're not supposed to have it there, you're going to become a distributor, an illegal distributor. You're going to have 12 plants. You're going to have 12 pounds of marijuana. You only need to keep 10 ounces for yourself at one time, and then you can start your regermination and growing process all over again, or you can accelerate it.
So my guess is what the state will do is regulate the fact that individuals cannot sell between themselves. Now, again, people are going to violate the law. They do it every day, right? We have all kinds of laws that people don't follow on a regular
I
basis.
mean, there are places in Michigan they still make moonshine up north
Correct.
It's illegal, but they do it.
Yes.
and crack cocaine. It's a huge business up. You have no idea. I don't want to besmirch any of the out-state counties, but the further up,
There's huge issues, and meth has come back, and we have big issues in Detroit with heroin and things like that, all of which are illegal, and people do them anyway. I think the state will do as best it can to limit or eliminate person-to-person sales and require that you only purchase from recreational marijuana retailers or micro-businesses. That being said, if people are growing in the basement and they cultivate more than their 10 ounces and they want to sell to someone else, they do that at their own risk. None of our clients will be advised to do something that silly, but people, unfortunately, don't always listen to their lawyers
Correct. Correct.
or follow the law.
And I will also throw another caution out there to the individuals who want to grow their own or perhaps get rid of surplus. This industry is driven by social media. I would not suggest, and I tell our clients every day, stay off of social media. Do not list what you have on Instagram, on Snapchat, on Facebook, on Twitter, because authorities, we're seeing from analyzing the Bureau's board findings, their public findings, which you can watch on Facebook, and also on the Licensing and Regulatory Agency's website once a month for the medical applicants, because they are disclosing quite a bit more. They are cautioning against the use of social media. They follow applicants on Instagram
Oh, yes, they
and
do.
Facebook. And when you are advertising happy hours, that brings up a flag to them that, hey, you are going outside of the bounds of a pharmaceutical, medical arena, and now you're getting into more of the rec scene and more of the under the radar that we've been dealing with for decades now.
And for as another example, right? They don't want you buying marijuana from California to sell in your store.
Correct.
Right? So when they go on Instagram and they see you communicating with a dispensary or provisioning center in California asking for them to ship products in violation of federal law for you to sell in your store, your license is getting denied.
Correct.
Like, that's just how it's going to go. The state is really strict, and I think that's another thing for people to point out. The folks that are getting licensed by the state, there is a really substantial background check that has to be gone through, and it isn't simply, oh, you don't have a criminal history and you've got enough money, so we're going to give this to you. They are very, very scrutinizing in terms of who they're giving licenses to. And I remember, Barry, we had a conversation when we were here last about whether or not the market was cornered by certain individuals or certain groups who were just going to be given licenses to grow tens of thousands of plants, and all the other folks were going to be out. What we have seen since then is that a number of those large players who bought huge space in jurisdictions that were opting in and spent millions of dollars to produce a facility, all of a sudden found themselves on the denied end of those applications. There have been a couple of groups who had more than 10 applications that were submitted to the state. The state turned around, denied all of them, and when asked what their basis was, they cited the administrative rule in the statute and said non-disclosure, and that was it. So we're finding that even folks who have substantial means, who are known large commodities who want to get into that industry, the state's saying no. We're not going to allow you just because you're a big group or you have a lot of money or you've spent X millions of dollars to build this warehouse out. We don't care. We're going to deny you for any reason we think is going to make you a bad fit for Michigan's industry. So they're scrutinizing people, and I think from the recreational side, they're going to be even more scrutinizing because they want to avoid allowing some of the things that people are legitimately fearful of happening from actually occurring.
So what's the cost to get a recreational license?
We don't know yet because the state hasn't set forth rules. So under Proposal 1, they have a year to put out the application and to put out regulations to tell people what the minimum requirements are. If I had to take a guess, I would say the regulations they've got in place for medical in terms of minimum financial wherewithal will be similar, but maybe lower than what they're going to require for recreational. It wouldn't surprise me if they were the same. It wouldn't surprise me if recreational had a higher number. And I say that because Proposal 1 does have some differences. So as far as, let's say you want to be a grower, right? So on the medical side, you can get 3 licenses, A, B, and C, and they have different plant counts. A is 500, B is 1,000, C is 1,500. They have the same format on recreational, but the plant counts are different. So there's a Class A, a B, and a C. Class A is 100, Class B is, if my recollection is correct, 500, and Class C is 2,000 plants.
Can I get home delivery?
On medical,
Yeah.
the state did put an implementation in place that so long as all of the rules were followed, in other words, the provisioning center can verify that they're a qualified patient, that they have not purchased their daily limit, and completes the transaction under the metric requirements, yes, they can do that. There are regulations on who can do it, but yes, that is being permitted.
Okay, so I can call Uber and Lyft and have Uber and Lyft pick up my supply.
Probably not. On the recreational side, we don't know.
Yeah, well, that's
They'll be, I imagine, again, I think that actually, I think that's something they probably will not permit under recreational. I think that's more of a medical, like, you need your medicine, we're gonna allow for the provisioning center to bring it to you under certain circumstances. I doubt that for recreational, they're going to have home deliveries to the store. Like we don't have beer deliveries to the front door. I don't suspect we're going to have marijuana.
Well, they have
deliveries
wine
to
deliveries right now from the big liquor stores.
I'll let you opine.
You go first, because we get wine deliveries, but from California, and they're through UPS, and there has to be someone at home with a card, a driver's license, indicating that you're 21 or older in order to take possession of that product.
Well, I see these fancy liquor stores, you
Oh,
know,
sure.
in Grosse Pointe and Bloomfield Hills.
Yes.
And they have delivery trucks. And you know they're delivering wine to the houses. So what's the difference? It's recreational. Why shouldn't they be able to do it?
The state is keeping a very strict regulatory database to ensure that ounce limits are strictly withheld and upheld. And in order to do that, I think you're going to have a harder time. That being said, there are some very innovative and entrepreneurial people, and if they can find a way to do it, I am certain that someone will figure it out.
Correct.
Aren't you concerned that with the passage of these new laws, and I'll say this again, aren't you legitimately concerned with the passage of these new laws that young people growing up are going to become more dependent on drugs than they have in the past?
Actually, I would say I'm not.
Aren't you concerned that some young man's going to be playing football and he's going to be under the influence of marijuana and he's going to pass out on the field? And then there's going to be a big article in the newspaper that said that they did a study, and the only reason he passed out is he was illegally ingesting marijuana before the game. I mean, athletes who do that, they can't play.
No, I on that last point, I agree with you. But here's the issue I have. I'm no more concerned about that happening than I am with an athlete who is going to consume alcoholic beverages illegally prior to the game, right? And there'll be an article about that, and it's an issue. I mean, underage alcohol use is an issue. Underage drug use is an issue. But am I more concerned about marijuana being a problem than I am with alcohol? I don't think so. And the reason for that is I don't see kids dying at universities because they binge use marijuana one night. You binge use alcohol one night, you get your BAC up to 0.4, you end up in the hospital, you can die. Never seen anybody from unadulterated marijuana, which I know you want to get to. But if you're just using THC and you get high, yes, it's illegal, so is underage drinking.
I don't have to go there to unadulterated. I just take a combination of drinking and marijuana at a social function when I'm in college, and I can get pretty jacked out of shape.
But if you live in, let's say you live in Florida, where it's not recreationally legal yet, right? Kids are doing that now, and it's illegal. So the big, I just had this conversation at the Thanksgiving dinner table with my family on Thursday, and I try to steer the topic away from it because I don't like to talk about politics at Thanksgiving, but it's inevitable with what we do.
They say never talk about politics and religion
Correct.
Thanksgiving Day. That's
Correct.
That's a message.
So we try to get away from that, but it was inevitable. It was going to come up because it just passed. And I was told by one of my cousins who's in medical school that she would not prescribe it for her patients. And wasn't I afraid of this very thing? And I said, no, because people are going to make bad decisions, whether something's legal or not. And if I'm looking at a spectrum of danger in terms of a controlled substance that we regulate for kids, marijuana is not at the top of my list. Alcohol, to me, is a far more dangerous thing for teenagers to get involved with. I don't think teenagers under the age of 21 should be getting involved with marijuana, and I'm sure that the police will be prosecuting for minor in possession, which, by the way, is no longer a misdemeanor in the state of Michigan. And they should enforce the rules. I would certainly not encourage my children under any circumstances to drink, use marijuana, or smoke. But if people, as a general rule, want to make bad decisions, no amount of regulation or legislation is going to stop them.
Okay, let's stop here for a second. Something just occurred to me is really important. You get charged with a crime, and you're out in the suburbs. And you know, the suburbs really are very hard on people.
Mhm.
They make them take drug tests. They make them go through urinalysis. So your letter comes up. It's B-Day. You got to go in.
Yep.
You got to drop. You're under the influence of marijuana. It's not going to be out of your system for 40 days, right?
Mhm.
However, I've been drinking on Saturday night, Sunday. B-Day's Tuesday. I'm going to be clean as a whistle if I just drink, correct?
Theoretically, yes, but you have to remember, and this is the big thing with drugged driving, so being high on marijuana when you drive. The Michigan courts have addressed this problem. There was a case, I think it was back in 2012, might have been 2013. It was People versus Fiesel. The Michigan Supreme Court said, if you have any active THC in your system at all, you're prosecuted for drug driving. It's strict liability. You're done. If you only have the metabolite of THC, which is a separate compound in your blood system, but no active THC, you cannot be prosecuted for it. So what I think you're going to see is two things. One, whether it's Detroit or the suburbs, judges are very smart people as a general rule. They will modify their probation orders as follows. Now they will say no consumption of alcohol or THC while you're on probation. And when you drop, if we see a spike in your THC number, we know you've been using and you're going to be violated.
I understand if you're skewing down, I understand that.
Right.
But you know, one of the big problems is when you go to court, you're dealing with drinking and driving and drug court, and you get charged. They don't have enough toxicologists in the state to do the testing. It takes 6 to 8 weeks to get the test results back.
Mhm.
And it just slows up the entire process.
Sure.
So what the flip side is, we're going to be spending a lot more money, taxpayer dollars, to oversee and monitor the legalization of marijuana.
Yes, but we're also going to have an influx of tax dollars. Recreational, Barry, is going to be taxed at 19%, which is a very large, quote-unquote, sin tax. And I think the state has instituted that level.
Where's
to
the money going to
perhaps
go? I'm sorry for interrupting.
prohibit.
I mean, they
Yes.
never use the money for the right things. I mean, in Detroit, the money was supposed to be used for education, and they used the money for some bonding to help pay for 2 big stadiums downtown.
Yes, and unfortunately, the state and the individual users and the growers and the processors and the provisioning centers on down the line can't control where the tax dollars are going to go. We're going to have to rely on our state government legislators and people who can regulate that to make sure that it goes where it is supposed to go. It is estimated that about 20 million from the first year of sales is going to go back into public education. But of course, we have the lottery system that's also supposed to put so
That's
much
the
money.
biggest
back
joke in the
into-
world.
Yes.
Our public
You're-
education, I think we're maybe 40th in the United States in terms of
Correct.
success in public education.
Yes.
Yeah,
And it's a sin. It's a sin.
And I don't disagree with you. And in fact, without commenting on the politics of it too much, Michigan has consistently been dropping over the years, and a large part of that is, I think, funding dollars.
It's
And-
discrimination, it's class
No, I
discrimination.
think there's
I
a lot
would
of
agree.
that.
It's all class discrimination.
Yes.
It's directed at minorities, especially African Americans.
Sure.
They don't want African American young people to succeed in school, so this is the way they do it.
But I will say, from the standpoint of your question, where are the tax dollars going to go? They anticipate about half of the money will be going into enforcement for the state, so some of that will be this problem. On the flip side of the coin, right, the law, in many ways, will benefit the system in terms of the burden that it has, because you're not going to see. And I sat at a district court as a city attorney for a couple of years as an assistant city attorney. The number of possession of marijuana cases that came before me was pretty high. And if that's the only charge that you have, those cases are going away unless you've got more than 2.5 ounces on your person. And I would argue, if you've got more than 2.5 ounces on your person, you're getting up towards more than personal use.
Well, you're
Correct.
So-
at the sale or distribution level.
Right, you're
I
you're,
understand.
you're getting
Yes.
up there. If you can have more in your house in a locked safe, that's fine under the law. That's okay. But when you're out and about, the law says you're not supposed to have it. You can't purchase more than that now. So why do you have more than that? Those cases will go away. So you're not going to have that number of those numbers of cases in the system. When we were both at the prosecutor's office for Wayne County, and we would go in for weekend warrant duty, which you go in and the police bring the warrants from Friday and Saturday and you review them. The number of cases that led to felony charges that were initiated because an officer has a traffic stop, walks up to the window and smells marijuana, which under the laws in the state of Michigan up until recreational passed, that was enough for probable cause.
Under
To search a vehicle.
check.
Yes.
Yes.
Correct.
The number of those cases, and that was the only probable cause that there was that led to felony charges. There's a pretty substantial percentage, and felony prosecutions are expensive. People don't look at the cost of those things, but the cost of enforcement for district court probation, I think, will be substantially outweighed by the savings you will see across the board in the system from not having to enforce these issues. And from I think from a fairness standpoint, how many young people, particularly African Americans and minorities, who are not only discriminated against as a general rule in many work environments, but who, because they have a possession of marijuana misdemeanor on their criminal record, can't get a job.
Okay, we're going to quit at this point today, but I'm going to have you back because I want to talk about all the other implications. I have you back in December. We got a quick
Wonderful.
call here. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
Gary and like the show. I have already tried to tell the young folk that I see and I can smell their cars that whether you got a car, whether it's legal or not, don't they have to worry about if the feds pull them over because the feds trump state laws? And that he said probable cause. I'm pretty sure if some young folks got pulled over, whether they were 21 or older, and they smelled that marijuana, they're going to dig until they tear that car up digging. And then you have to worry about the plants. We've already witnessed so many instances where people are planted and caused to be thrown into the system, wrongfully convicted. Thank you for taking my call. I'll listen to what you have to say.
Well, the only thing I have to say, I'm going to have you back,
Yeah.
is that next Saturday, we're having a Law Power Hour function from 11 to 3 on December the 1st at the Considine Center next to the Little Rock Baptist Church to give out free legal advice. And we're going to cover probate, we're going to cover criminal, civil, bankruptcy. So if you got any questions, come down. Anybody's involved in this real estate scam, rent to own, and has a problem, come down and we'll help direct you to the right people to get you through this problem. It's December 1st, 11 to 3 at the Considine Center next to the Little Rock Baptist Church on Woodward Avenue in Detroit. There'll be about a half a dozen lawyers who've been on the air. I didn't invite you because your specialty is going to come back here and our listeners are going to get a lot more information about working under the influence of marijuana.
Oh, yes.
And that's where we're going to start. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Barry. It's a pleasure as always.